When we think of the Skinwalker, I'm sure we all have that one video that we've seen on the internet that immediately comes to our minds. That thing lurking in the shadows that looks almost human, but not quite human. Something imitating a screaming person in the middle of the woods somewhere, where a person normally wouldn't be. Or even just some animal behaving in odd fashion, almost like he has human-like characteristics. We've attributed all of these things to skinwalker activity. But what exactly is a skinwalker? Where did they come from? And are they still here today? Welcome to the 21 CD podcast. I'm your ghost, John. Let's get into it. Welcome to the 21 CD podcast, everybody. I'm your ghost, John. Man, stuff is hard sometimes, right? We just gotta take a step back and, stuff is weird these days for sure. But, so last Tuesday we talked about the Wendigo, and, I thought, this week maybe I should talk about the Skinwalker, since the Wendigo and the Skinwalker are often mixed up or confused with one another. They have a lot of similar traits. Sometimes I think we use the Skinwalker and the Wendigo, like the name, interchangeably to describe something. But after doing research, you come to find out that these things are actually vastly different from one another when you really get down to it. They're completely different creatures. They're completely different cryptids, and despite the fact that they share a lot of similar traits. So we're going to go over those similar traits today, as well as a few allegedly true horror stories relating to the Skinwalker. Keep in mind that all of my information for this episode has come from actual Navajo researchers or storytellers. They're Navajo tribes people who have dedicated great time and energy to getting this information out to people so that we can sort of have the honor of having a glimpse into Navajo culture so that we can really learn about these things instead of just finding some random source online to get all our information about skinwalkers from, because a lot of that information out there is just not true. It's stuff that has been made up or fabricated or elaborated on to the point where what we know about the Skinwalker is not even true a lot of the time. So a special thanks to Sean Klin and Navajo Traditional Teachings, two Navajo storytellers who have amazing YouTube accounts that you guys should check out. Of course, their accounts will be credited in my show notes if you're interested in that. I've got a lot of notes because I wanted to make sure that I got the information across effectively, and I couldn't have done it without them. So let's get right into it. A Skinwalker is not a Wendigo, even though we often mix the two up. It turns out that they only have a few similar characteristics. A skinwalker is essentially a witch or a warlock or some kind of medicine man or woman. And I'm not going to say the Navajo name for this creature because I will just absolutely butcher it. But if you were to say skinwalker in Navajo, it translates to with it, he goes on all fours. And the Skinwalker is just one of several types of Navajo witches and is considered the most volatile and dangerous. But despite that fact, there actually was a time when Skinwalkers weren't necessarily evil. There was a time where they were simply individuals who could shapeshift and didn't do so with evil intentions. They did it to help their people and to traverse the landscape quicker and more effectively without doing any real harm to anybody. For the Navajo people, witchcraft is just another part of their spirituality and one of the ways of their lives, really. As such, witchcraft has long been part of their culture, history, and traditions. Witches exist alongside humans and are not considered supernatural beings. They're just people with maybe supernatural abilities. The Navajo believe that there are places where the powers of both good and evil are present, and those powers can be harnessed for either good or evil. Medicine men utilize these powers to heal and aid members of their community. At the same time, those who practice Navajo witchcraft seek to direct the spiritual forces to cause harm and misfortune to others. This type of Navajo witchcraft is known as the Witchery way, which uses human corpses in various ways, such as tools from the bones and concoctions that are used to curse, harm, or even kill intended victims. The knowledge of these powers is passed down from the elders through the generations. And it's important to note that that's how a lot of our knowledge on Native American tribes has existed as long as it has. It's usually through oral history, the tales and way of things being passed down by word of mouth from generation to generation. But skinwalkers, though we think of them as supreme evil, they weren't always that way. They originate from the lands of the Navajo Nation, so we're talking about the Colorado, Arizona, and New Mexico area. There were spiritual people who would teach medicine men and women to shapeshift. Originally, this was a very good thing. They were taught to shapeshift in order to easily traverse this massive amount of land and to help their people. And the process took many years to learn how to do, too. This wasn't something that they just were able to do instantly. The spiritual people would teach the medicine men and women, and the medicine men would spend years learning how to shapeshift effectively. There were many rituals, songs, and dances, and much more, and a ton of time that went into learning how to shapeshift, to essentially walk in the skin of another being. But there were those who did not want to spend the time that it cost to learn this powerful skill. We're all human, and the Navajo unfortunately fell victim to impatience and evil as well. They thought there must be a better way, a faster way. So they began to search for that faster way, and as evil does, it found a way to exploit mankind. In this case, through these impatient Navajo medicine men and women who wished to shapeshift but not pay the cost of time. Evil spirits promised these impatient Navajo would-be skinwalkers that they could help them shapeshift, and it would take a much smaller amount of time than it did before. But there was a different kind of cost that these Navajo would have to pay. So, mankind, both weak and eager, opened their hearts and minds to evil yet again. They listened to what they would have to do in order to gain the power of shapeshifting much quicker, as these evil spirits promised. The evil spirits told them that they would have to kill an immediate family member or someone very close to them. So we're talking a child, a spouse, a grandparent, a parent, a sibling. They would need to be taken out to the wild and slaughtered, sacrificed to the evil spirits. And there are other steps that would need to be taken in order to receive the power of shape-shifting from evil, but a lot of those steps have been concealed by the Navajo and kept sacred and hidden so that this kind of activity can be kept to a minimum. Skinwalkers are said to draw their power from the land of the Navajo Nation. There's a natural power that is emitted in the Navajo Nation that skinwalkers can draw from. And like all tribes of North America, the land they chose for a reason. Because of their spiritual influence, such as sacrifices, burials, magical practices, etc., geographical significance, and a host of other reasons, tribal lands are often considered very powerful, especially to the people of that tribe. Who knows, maybe this is why when outsiders attempt to go to these places and change them, a lot of bad things plague those people. I mean, just think of the weird issues surrounding the Denver International Airport, built on native land. The Superstition Mountains, that's Navajo Nation as well. Or even the Skinwalker Ranch, that's also part of Navajo Nation, part of Navajo tribal land that has been effectively taken from them. This act of taking from Navajo Nation could largely be the reason for all of the negative activity around, especially when you consider the fact that a lot of this is witchcraft. These are basically evil spirits roaming the land, claiming revenge in a way. All this to say, though, that skinwalkers, despite the fact that they are able to leave their tribal lands, the Navajo believe that it is rare that they do so. They do not seem to roam like that. Each animal form that a shapeshifter would like to take needs to be killed, sacrificed, and the skin needs to be marked up with special symbols and a specific ritual done in order for a shapeshifter to be able to walk in that animal's skin. It's a very in-depth process that requires a great amount of practice to nail down. It's not just like putting a new skin on in Fortnite or some video game, some role-playing game. And, you know, while I'm talking about this, you guys are probably like, man, he's talking about this like this is a thing that can actually be done. Like, if I just take the time, I could be a shapeshifter. And it's important to note that the Navajo believe this is very much a real thing, a thing that can be done and is done to this day. Many Navajo believe that the skinwalker walks among them at any given time. They could come in contact with one. And we'll get to that a little bit later on. But these aren't just creatures that have been. These are men and women who have been overtaken by evil spirits. And skinwalkers continue to roam to this day. And yes, you can even become one if you're not careful. If you open your heart and your soul to evil, they believe that you can change yourself into a skinwalker, and that's not necessarily a good thing. So the wolf, the coyote, and the buck are the most common forms that skinwalkers take, as these are the most common animals, the most readily available animal forms in the Navajo Nation. And despite that fact, though, any animal can be mimicked. Each animal has to go through its own process before the skinwalker can walk in its skins. The bear and the mountain lion are kind of unique because despite the fact that they are readily available in the lands of the Navajo Nation, they are considered sacred and do seem to resist the witchcraft more than these other animals that I've mentioned. So one thing that you'll probably recognize immediately when I mention it is the fact that skinwalkers are able to mimic the sounds of both humans and animals. And this is largely to lure prey in or to cause chaos or confusion, but that's one thing that the media and horror movies and all that kind of stuff really gets right about skinwalkers. And that's why you always have to be careful when you hear sounds in the woods that sound like they're almost right, but not quite right, especially if you're in the Navajo Nation, because that is very indicative of skinwalker activity. They mimic the sounds that they hear and the sounds of the skins that they're walking in, the animals that they're imitating. That is very much a skinwalker ability and trait. So in the Navajo Nation nowadays, homes are very spread out. I went on a trip not too long ago, and I actually have a little documentary about it on this YouTube account, the 21 CD podcast YouTube account. It's called Do Hard Things, but it's a trip that I did with my brothers, and we went out to Navajo Nation a couple of the days actually, and it's true. These homes are very, they're distanced by some land, and this is deep desert land. And sometimes they're miles apart, and there's dogs everywhere in the Navajo Nation. Every household has dogs. There's wild dogs, like domesticated but wild, like, you know what I mean? Like the half domesticated dogs, the dogs that have multiple owners, the dogs that just go from place to place and roam the desert and find their little area to pack up in and whatnot. There's dogs everywhere. And, you know, I think there's now, after doing research, a deeper reason for that. So dogs spook off coyotes and other wildlife, as we know. And they also can get a pretty good read on people. So they also spook off the unsavory type of humans, or at least warn that, hey, there's like a bad guy nearby. But they can do the same exact thing for evil. If a dog starts barking and then suddenly stops, it's often because evil is near. So because of this, skinwalkers are said to be able to use dog whistles, whether they fashion them out of bone or something else, like they're able to mimic and make the sound of a dog whistle, but they do this in order to keep the dogs barking, essentially, to keep the dogs on edge, to deceive the dogs, and to mask where they are. And that's a very interesting trait that the skinwalker uses in order to be able to get closer to their human victims, closer to humans, and pass through the protection of the dogs. So that's an interesting trait that I never knew I never even thought that skinwalkers could manipulate dogs through the use of these dog whistles in order to cause them to behave in a certain way. So that's a really interesting trait, I thought, that I heard about when I was researching all of this. So the evil society of the Navajo witches is said to gather in dark caves or secluded places for several purposes: to initiate new members, to plot their activities, harm people from a distance with black magic, and also to perform dark ceremonial rites. These ceremonies are very similar to other tribal affairs, including dancing, feasts, rituals, and sand painting. But they were corrupted with dark connotations, because when these medicine men and women decided to use evil as a vessel to get them the power of shape-shifting much quicker, evil inevitably corrupted all of these ceremonies as well. The evildoers are also said to engage in necrophilia with female corpses and commit cannibalism, incest, and grave robberies. So you can see that these, like, skinwalkers are very, very evil, and that sort of, the vast majority. Of course, there are still the skinwalkers that aren't evil, but the vast majority are evil because that is the easier route to take to get this ability. But you can see how they relate to the Wendigo in a way. Like, the Wendigo is an evil spirit that possesses somebody sort of against their will, whereas a skinwalker is an a person who allows that evil spirit to possess them or works for an evil spirit in exchange for this ability of shape-shifting. You can see how they're very, very similar. During these gatherings, the skinwalkers shapeshift into their animal forms or go about naked, wearing only beaded jewelry and ceremonial paint. The leader of the skinwalkers is usually an old man who is very powerful and a long-lived skinwalker. So kind of like a vampire, like in that way. Skinwalkers also have other powers, including reading others' minds, controlling their thoughts and behavior, causing disease and illness, destroying property, and even death. Those who have talked of their encounters with these evil beings describe several ways to know if a skinwalker is near. They make sounds around homes, such as knocking on windows, banging on walls, and scraping noises on the roof. On some occasions, they have been spied peering through windows. More often, they appear in front of vehicles in hopes of causing a serious accident. Because it's important to remember that these, apart from shapeshifting, these are probably already witches or warlocks with magical abilities. And that's part of what makes the shapeshifter so dangerous, is these are really humans who have very spiritual abilities, paranormal abilities, using usually black magic and witchcraft. They can cause terrible things to happen and do so. And they also just have this ability to shapeshift and be a skinwalker. So you're not just dealing with a cryptid here. You're dealing with a person, a witch, a warlock who means to do harm and also has this evil spirit on their side that allows them to have this extra ability of skinwalking. The skinwalker kills usually out of greed, anger, envy, spite, or revenge. The whole revenge thing is why I think that whenever, people try to take native land and use it for their own means, they're usually plagued by, a lot of bad happenings. And I think a lot of that could be, especially in the Navajo Nation, I believe a lot of that could be due to skinwalkers or spirits roaming their land that does not, subscribe to whatever these colonizers are using the land for. Skinwalkers also rob graves for personal wealth and collects much-needed ingredients for black magic uses. These witches live on the unexpired lives of their victims, and they must continually kill or perish themselves. Yeah, so skinwalkers also use human bones as weapons. That, they can kill in their animal form or any form, really, but they also craft weapons and poisons out of human bones and animal bones. But when it comes to grave robbing, they're also usually harvesting bones for these sort of evil activities, including weaponry. Skinwalkers and other witches have long been blamed for unexpected struggles and tragedies, including sickness, drought, poor crops, and sudden deaths. Even smaller or individual problems, such as windstorms during dances, alienation of affection by mates, the death of livestock, and reversal of fortunes. All of this is often believed to be witches' work. So that's kind of like what a skinwalker is, what a skinwalker is really about. And if you're like me, you're kind of starting to understand why the Navajo prefer not to talk too much about the skinwalker. It's because they believe that even just expressing too much interest in the skinwalker can lead you to being susceptible to an evil spirit sort of overtaking you. It can lead you down the path of being sort of open because you're really interested in this thing. It can sort of creep into you, invade you, and eventually lead you to evil, to being taken over by these evil spirits. And Sean Glenn especially, he talked about how he has helped rid the land on multiple occasions of these skinwalkers because he lives on the reservation in Navajo Nation. I don't even like calling it a reservation, but like he lives in Navajo Nation, and he talks about how his people will report these things on the roofs of their homes. Like they will be out there, and they'll hear them scratching on the walls or pounding on the roof or just pitter-pattering across the roof or running through their areas, and their dogs freaking out and then changing erratically. Like he has spoken on how these things need to be tracked down and eliminated. So there's a story. This story is about the Navajo witch purge of 1878, which initially evolved from a cultural response to so many people moving across and onto Navajo lands. After a series of wars with the U.S. Army, the Navajo were expelled from their land and forced to march to the Bosque Redondo, which is now known as Fort Sumner in New Mexico, in what is known as the Long Walk of the Navajo in 1864. Just one of those terrible things that American colonizers did that we'll just never learn about in the history books. There, the people suffered from bad weather, failed crops, illness, and death, reducing their numbers dramatically. After 4 years, the government finally admitted that they had made a mistake, and the Navajo were allowed to return to their homeland in the Four Corners area. Like, literally, the people who forced the Navajo out were just like, this place is terrible, nothing works here, we have nothing but bad luck here, we don't really want to be here. And so the government was like, all right, well, then we might as well give it back to the Navajo, which is super messed up. During these years, many of the tribe's members were said to have turned to shape-shifting to escape the terrible conditions. In the meantime, the rest of the tribe was convinced that their gods had deserted them. Once the people had returned to their homeland, their conditions improved, but the dreaded skinwalkers, whom they blamed for their years on the bleak reservation, were still among them. Accusations of witchcraft and the hunting of the skinwalkers began. When someone found a collection of witch artifacts wrapped in a copy of the Treaty of 1868, the tribal members unleashed deadly consequences. The Navajo witch purge occurred in 1878, in which 40 suspected Navajo witches were killed to restore harmony and balance to the tribe. Like, that's how deeply the Navajo believe in this stuff. In the 1980s, one of the most notable events occurred when a family was driving through the Navajo reservation. Something jumped from the ditch as they slowed to make a sharp curve. It was described as black, hairy, and wearing a shirt and pants. A few days after this event, the family was awakened to loud drumming and chanting at their home in Flagstaff, Arizona. Outside their home were 3 dark forms of men outside their fence. However, these shadowy creatures seemingly could not climb the fence and soon left. But this isn't the only time this has occurred. These events have occurred in the Four Corners area of southwest Colorado, southeast Utah, northeast Arizona, and northwest New Mexico. Like, sounds kind of like Dogman, doesn't it? Like they say the Navajo prefer to believe that the Skinwalkers don't typically leave Navajo Nation because of the amount of power that the Skinwalkers can pull from the Navajo lands. But that's not to say that other tribes don't have their own Skinwalkers, their own form of Skinwalker. And it's possible that many other tribes have their own Skinwalkers around. So if you're living in Washington, which is not Navajo Nation, but you're fairly convinced that there are credible Skinwalker stories out near you, it's very possible that there is a tribe out there that has their own legend of a form of Skinwalker, and you should do some research on that to find out how much credibility that story actually has, because odds are it's a lot. In the 1990s, a ranch in northeast Utah, far away from the Navajo reservation, became the partial focus of the Skinwalkers. You guys already know where this is going. Called the Sherman Ranch, or the Skinwalker Ranch, and the UFO Ranch. This place has a history of UFOs, aliens, cattle mutilations, and crop circles. Located near the Ute Indian Reservation, these people have long thought that the Navajo put a curse on their tribe in retribution for many perceived transgressions. Because remember, these tribes were warring with each other long before the white man ever came to North America. Since then, the Skinwalkers have plagued the Ute people. Witchcraft represents the antithesis of Navajo cultural values and is not tolerated. They work to avoid, prevent, and cure it in their daily behaviors. However, when it exists, their laws have always said that when a person becomes a witch, they have forfeited their humanity and their right to exist, so they should be killed. That was one thing that I was shocked to learn when researching the Skinwalker, was how deeply the Navajo believe in not opening yourself to any kind of witchcraft, any kind of evil spirituality, even though it is very deeply ingrained in sort of their lives, because they're constantly, they believe, being invaded by evil. It's very important to resist it at all costs and not become a witch, not give in to witchcraft to make life better. However, Skinwalkers are notoriously hard to kill, and attempts are usually unsuccessful. Trying to kill one will often result in the witch seeking revenge. We're going back to the whole revenge thing of when people sort of do the Navajo wrong or are invading Navajo lands where Skinwalkers draw power from. Successfully killing generally requires the assistance of a powerful shaman who knows spells and rituals that can turn the Skinwalker's evil back upon itself. This is another similarity to the Wendigo. Another alternative is to shoot the creature with bullets dipped in white ash. However, this shot must hit the witch in the neck or the head. Sean Clenn did say that using ash often aids in preventing the Skinwalker from harming you. For if you wear it or you douse yourself or you camp in it, it is said to ward off Skinwalkers. Traditionally, the Navajo will not speak with outsiders about these creatures, like we already said, for fear of retribution by the Skinwalkers, because these things are very real to them. It is a taboo subject amongst the natives themselves. Even the interest in such matters is said to begin the evil recruitment that will render you victim to the evil of the Skinwalker. Crazy stuff. Crazy stuff. Let's go over another story. So I found this online. When I get these stories, I prefer to get the ones that I find in like the most random locations. So I'm like this one, I think I don't even remember where exactly I found it. I don't remember if it was a YouTube comment or a Reddit comment, but it seems like that is how you have to find stories these days of this type of stuff. Because if you're just like looking for Bigfoot stories or looking for Wendigo stories, looking for stuff that's actually happening, you're getting all of this fake stuff that's on like Discovery Channel or whatever, like this stuff that's obviously made just for entertainment. But I'm starting to find that in this age of censorship, where they are actively trying to remove any sort of real stories about the spiritual, the supernatural, the metaphysical, all of those realms. They're trying to hide all of that from us because they don't want us to actually believe that this is a world that we live in. They want all of those things, portals, dimensions, all of that. They want it to be a fantasy world that we just go to for entertainment. So I'm finding that the real stories are in these comments that are not actually like put out for any sort of gain. Like these are just comments, people just sharing their stories when other people are posting or requesting stories. These people aren't looking for anything from posting their comments except trying to get the word out that this stuff is still out here, this stuff is still happening. So that's where I got this story, and I thought it was interesting. And I'm going to read it for you now. So the story goes, I decided to join my bestie Karen for a 3-day stay at her grandmother's place out on the reservation. Her grandmother lives near a place called Tuba City, Arizona, in the middle of nowhere, but surrounded by rural homes. We go to college together, and I was kind of interested to know about Navajo tradition. The first day we stayed, it was pretty chill, nothing out of the ordinary. But then her grandma, not that old, she was maybe around 67, said that a stray dog came out of nowhere and wouldn't leave. To me, it did act kind of strange, and it was kind of ugly looking. Black, shaggy coat, looked like a mix between a German Shepherd and a lab. That night, we were watching a movie in the living room, which had big windows that looked out into the front where the cars are parked, nothing fancy, with the curtains wide open. The grandma was in the kitchen cooking dinner, and we were watching a movie. Next to the window is a medium-sized bookshelf where like DVDs are kept. Karen went to put back a DVD we had just watched, but she freaked out because that stray black dog was staring at us through the window, standing on top of the wooden box that was outside. Not something that normal dogs do from my point of view or from hers. Usually, my dog, which is a house dog, scratches at the door to be let in. Res dogs aren't house dogs, and dogs inside houses are frowned upon in Navajo tradition, meant to protect the house and the owner from the outside. The other dogs seemed to stay away from this strange dog. Karen opened the door and yelled at it to get off the box, and it ran off behind the shed. So we went to Tuba City to get some groceries, and then we came back to the house. The dog was nowhere to be seen, nothing unusual. Grandma went to visit some people, so it was just Karen and I. About 5 o'clock, we heard someone trying to open the door. Both of us looked out, since there had been no car heard and no dogs barking. Looking out the living room window to the door, and there was that dog again, trying to open the door with its paws. 2 paws wrapped around the brass doorknob, standing on its hind legs. I thought that was weird, but wasn't really freaked out. Karen was, though. She opened the door and chased it off. Grandma came back later, and Karen told her. Grandma didn't like what she heard, and as she was getting ready to sleep, we all slept in the spare bedroom since it had 2 beds. One window with curtains opened a little. We turned off the light, but there was a sound coming from on top of the roof. Pitter-patter footsteps and scratching sounds and panting. It then sounded like it jumped off onto the large plastic water barrel they had, because they collect rainwater out there. At first, we heard what sounded like barking, but as it grew louder, the other dogs seemed to be barking at something also. And then all of a sudden, something was running around the house barking, and it was no dog. There was no way that it was a dog. The barking sounded human. A deep male voice barking like it knew that we knew it wasn't a dog. It was like, woof, 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 ruff, ruff, arf, arf, arf. Just exactly like that, adding the W's, R's, and A's. Then panting again by the window, and we started freaking out. Karen decided to, in my opinion, this was stupid, opened the curtains to look out, and there was the stray dog on its hind legs looking into our bedroom, but this time it stunk, and what I thought were 2 black holes in the neck. Another pair of eyes twinkled. Think of those ugly, glossy spider eyes staring at you, and the paws were deformed, looking hands with overgrown, somewhat thick and sharp fingernails. Again, both screaming and shuddering, the curtains closed. Grandma came running through the door and seeing it. First thing she did was grab ashes from the fireplace, load 3 shells into the shotgun, and from under her bed, bless herself in Navajo, and then she went outside to shoot it, yelling in Navajo about how the thing wasn't welcomed there, and to get the hell out of there, for it to go to linger somewhere else. Them both being traditional, the next day they called a medicine man to come over and put cedar in. He prayed over everyone with cedar smoke and an eagle feather, blessed the place, made us eat bitter herbs called eagle's gull or something, and gave me an arrowhead. Apparently I needed to carry one for protection, and a little pouch called corn pollen. Seemed to work pretty well. The medicine man said the dog was a skinwalker, which in Navajo is a long word, but I call them Yoshis. The body of the stray dog, which was killed by the skinwalker, made an illusion so we wouldn't know it wasn't a real dog. He also said that Yoshis tend to harm people by using some sort of human bone straw to spit at someone. Think spitballs except deadlier, and get human bones into them. Doctors can't detect it, but the medicine man said that day pulled a piece of human skull out of Grandma's right shoulder. Pretty big, about 2 inches long and 1 centimeter thick. It was real because we watched him pull it out of her. It was very intense. Dang. So sorry if that story sounded a little bit roughly told. Like, again, I'm reading a story that was commented on somebody else's post, but all of that stuff it lines up with what I've been reading about the actual skinwalker according to the Navajo. Like that, all of that stuff. The human bones, the ash, running on the roof, the dogs freaking out or not freaking out. The creepiest part is the eyes and the neck, because it's like the skinwalker and the hands, like the dog like having distorted human hands and like eyes peering out of the dog's neck. Like, oh man, like this. You know, like in the last video, last Tuesday, I said the Wendigo was the scariest, but man, I'm thinking, like, after researching and reading these stories about skinwalkers, they're just so messed up. And I don't even know if you can call them cryptids because they're witches. So it's like, I don't know. In my opinion, that makes it almost scarier that these are just evil humans. I've got another story. The story goes that a Navajo family encountered a terrifying creature while driving late at night on a deserted road. The creature had the appearance of a large black dog with glowing red eyes. It began to chase their vehicle, easily keeping pace despite the high speed. As the family desperately tried to escape, the creature suddenly darted off into the darkness, disappearing without a trace. This encounter left the family deeply disturbed and fearful, as they believed they had encountered a skinwalker. They sought guidance from a Navajo elder who advised them to perform certain protective rituals and provided them with charms to ward off evil spirits. While this story and similar accounts exist within Navajo folklore, it's important to recognize that skinwalkers are deeply rooted in cultural beliefs and spirituality. They are considered sacred and sensitive subjects within the Navajo community, and discussing them with respect and cultural sensitivity is essential. It's worth noting that stories and legends surrounding skinwalkers vary among different Native American tribes and regions, as we kind of said before. These tales are often passed down orally and may differ in details and interpretations. They play a significant role in cultural traditions, serving as cautionary tales and reminders of the importance of balance, respect, and living in harmony with nature. And I just want to say, when people start talking about Dogman, because I saw so many stories pertaining to the Skinwalker that seemed to match up with Dogman stuff. Like, this black dog thing is recurrent in Skinwalker tales. I don't know why, but that's often what the Dogman is described as too, an upright walking dog, and usually black or dark in color. Just saying, that seems to be a synchronicity of some type. There's also a story from a book that you may or may not heard of called, I think it's called Tales from the Grid Square. And it's essentially stories of the supernatural or paranormal told by service members. And there's this story in that book about a military policeman who was Native, and this was also on one of the bases in Navajo Nation, and he went out on watch duty at one point, and he brought his laptop, and he brought a camera or something with him, and he went out to an area where he was going to sort of do, what are they called, patrols, but this was also an area that he was interested in hunting in, so he had a deer stand. And on one of these patrol missions that he was on, just patrolling around the base in this area, he was alone, and he took the opportunity to sort of sit up in one of his deer stands that he had in this area. And he was just sort of sitting there watching. The night was falling, but it wasn't so dark that he couldn't see. And he thought he heard a voice or a sound of some sort, if I remember correctly. Forgive me if I'm not, because I don't have this story written down. I'm just telling it from memory. But he heard something, and he said he thought it sounded like human voices. And so he was getting kind of excited because he was like, I'm going to catch somebody out here. Like, finally, I never catch anybody out here. This is about to be exciting. But what came out of the trees was not a human. It was a deer. It was a buck with antlers. And it went up to a tree within the sight of his deer stand. And he was just sort of watching this buck, kind of disappointed that it wasn't a human, but still interested because obviously he wants to hunt this land, and he knows that there's a buck here at a minimum. And he's watching this buck, and it goes up to this tree that he can see from his deer stand, and it just starts bashing its antlers into the tree. and it keeps going. It's ramming like unnaturally hard. It's bashing its head, and eventually the antlers fall off, and then it continues to bash its skull into the tree, and brain matter and blood are starting to stream out of this buck's head, and it just keeps smashing its face and its skull into the tree until it's just this disgusting mess, and the eyeballs are like hanging out of its face. And then it stands up on two legs and it looks directly at him. And he said that in that moment he could hear voices in his head that seemed to be this thing talking to him. And then before he could really react, it darted off into the woods. And like completely bloodied and mangled, it just fled off into the woods. And he was frozen in fear, and during that time he actually dropped his laptop and his camera, I believe it was, and he just fled the scene. He left them there. And I can't remember if it was a week or a month later, he came back and get his electronics again, which were probably ruined by this point. But he remembers saying that, you know, he went over to the tree and there was pieces of skull and antler there, and it was still bloody from, you know, what he had witnessed. So I don't know what to make of that, but I've heard that type of story told on multiple occasions by hunters. These deer that will come out of the woods, bash their faces to oblivion on a tree or a rock, sometimes drink their own blood, and then they'll stand up on two legs and they'll actually look at the hunters before they flee into the forest again. And the hunters just don't even know how to react in that moment, because as you can imagine, that's horrifying. And this is a tale that has been told by numerous, like so many that I stopped reading them once I heard how the story was starting. I was just like, this is another story about these deer that are walking out of the woods in Navajo land and bashing their faces on stones or trees until there's nothing left, and then walking away. It's so bizarre and horrifying. And, you know, they seem to think that this is skinwalker activity. This is a skinwalker. I have no idea. Like, it's crazy to me. And the skeptics say that it's that chronic wasting syndrome or whatever that deers are usually can be infected by, especially in North America. It's where these deer basically rot from the inside out and become zombies. They don't have any control over themselves, and they become these disgusting, mangled forms of what they once were. And that's what a lot of it is attributed to. But I don't think it can all be explained by that. Some of these stories are just too specific and too bizarre to be explained by some sort of parasite or disease that infects animals. But you guys should let me know if you guys have seen a skinwalker, or think that you have seen a skinwalker, or if you've heard stories of skinwalkers in your area. I'm interested in those kinds of stories. And what did you guys think of this episode? Like, when it comes to Wendigo and skinwalkers, there's a lot of similarities, but also some very, very distinct differences. Personally, I'm not trying to meet either of them in the woods, but I almost feel like I would have a better chance surviving against the Wendigo at this point, because these things, no way, man. It also makes me want to go back to Navajo Nation and talk to some people, some of the Navajos out there, and see, you know, like, have you guys had any contact with this sort of thing? Have you guys witnessed something like this? But I'm not even sure they would talk to me about it. They probably wouldn't even be interested in talking about it, because everything that I've been reading has just been like, yeah, these things are out here. These things are real. We don't talk about it. They are essentially demons. They are from the devil. We're not inviting that into our house, into our minds, into our lives in any way whatsoever. But yeah, guys, hope you enjoyed this episode. I had a great time talking about it with you guys. Remember to like, comment, share, subscribe. I need all the help I can get. Let's keep growing as a community. The 21 CD community is it's all I've got. It's really special to me, and I love coming out here and talking to you guys every week. Have a safe week. It's a short one. Thanksgiving is coming up, so happy Thanksgiving. I've got another episode that I was going to drop on Thursday before I realized that Thursday was actually Thanksgiving. It is a missing 411, so we'll see when I release that episode, because I'm pretty sure you guys won't be listening to 21 CD on Thanksgiving. I don't blame you. But if you guys want a little bonus piece of content, you guys can head over to the YouTube, because yesterday I dropped an hour-long video essentially reacting to and debunking a viral ghost hunters little video that they did at the Conjuring House. It's kind of interesting. You guys might want to check it out. It's not in audio format for podcast listeners because it's very visual. So you guys can check it out on the YouTube if you're interested. And yeah, if I don't see you guys on Thursday, the next episode will be on Tuesday. You know how it is. Or maybe Monday if I'm feeling super frisky, because lately I've been just wanting to get content out. Just giving you guys as much as I can. So, all right, guys, remember, don't drink the water and question everything. Later.